Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Educated Collins Snap channel. How you doing? So today we're going to be talking about order and priority in Marvel Snap. So order and priority, right? Those are two concepts. I think they're quite important to know what they are, how they work, and some of the decisions you have to think about when you're playing your cards in regards to these two mechanics. So what is order? Right? Order is the positioning cue of how cards are being played and how they affect the outcome. So essentially, when you play a card, that card that you play first is the first in the queue. The card you play afterwards is next in the queue. The card you play after that is next in the queue. So there's a order of operations and how cards get played and what the board state looks like based on those play patterns. All right. Priority is the metric that explains who goes first in a turn. So it's basically how do you decide who is going first, who has a first order or so. So basically knowing this priority system lets you be sure, okay, my card I'm gonna play goes after his cards he plays. How does that affect the gameplay? How does that affect my play pattern? So knowing priority lets you know who goes first on the order system. So, how does order work? Order is basically determined by when you play the card. What card gets played first is first in the queue. What cards play second is second in the queue. It's not really based on left to right or highest power or any of those other metrics. It's just basically based on when the card is played on the board. So that's it's a simple system, but it's an effective system and a system that works well. So here, I guess I should have talked about. So here I have an example. I've played this card in the middle first. I've played the second card on the left. Second, I played the card right after it third. So from that description, the card in the middle will be played first. The card second on the left side will play second. The card right afterwards will be played third. And I do have a video just kind of showcasing that example. So you see that one goes first, one on the left goes second, one on the third goes third. And you can also see my opponent right played a card first in there and then also played a card right afterwards. And you can see that order did even matter in my opponent's example where they played the Angela first and then the card afterwards was able to trigger Angela's ability, right? For example, let's say Angela was played second, right? Angela wouldn't get that proc from her ability and they would have lost 2 points. So order works or affects a lot of cards and it's just an important mechanic that you want to make sure you're getting correctly. So now let's talk about priority. So how does priority work? The easiest way to tell is the glowing nameplate. So if you look at the top of the screen, you'll have your names, and who goes first will have the glowing nameplate. So that's just the easy, simple way that you can always look, always check. Turn one is random. So that's like the weirdest part where turn one, it's going to be basically just a coin flip who has priority. The nice thing is that it's not super duper relevant most of the time. If you have priority or not, I would say like the biggest downside is maybe Electra. If you wanted to snipe your opponent's turn one card with Electra, you won't be able to do that if you don't have if you have priority. But usually, if games are tied, then the priority becomes random. But usually, past the first, second turns, it's going to be very hard to consistently have ties in the game. So it's not too big of a deal. So if there's a tie, or generally the player winning two locations has priority. So if and then if a location is tied, then it's the player with the highest total power or the most total power. So you add all the locations together, and then the total power, the one who has the most total power will have priority in that example. So here I have an example of the tied system. You can see in Kalamata, they're tied there. And then you have bar with no name and bar sinister. So according to my example, right, highest total power will have priority. But I wanted to put an example with bar with no name since that sometimes confuses people. Bar with no name kind of has the opposite effect. The power you put in there is more like negative power. So here you'd look at this, you'd add the power up, you'd say, oh, the person on the bottom has the highest total power. But because of bar with no name is more like a negative power increase, you'd have to deduct that 16 and deduct that 6. So in this example, the one on the top actually has the highest total power due to the interaction with bar with no name. So that's something that confuses a lot of people sometimes when you hear highest total power. Bar with no name is more of a negative power. So you just have to keep that in mind anytime you're playing with that location in play. All right. So why does order matter? I would say card order can dramatically affect the outcome of a match and be the reason for a win or a loss, right? Whether you play the Angela or not, like, oh, that's, it's 2 power, it's not that big of a deal. But I'd say there's so many other more important examples of ordering that can really skew whether you would have won or you were going to lose. I do have an example coming up here. So this is a video from Clean Up 141. Just a nice, cool video showcasing the power of order. He's playing Dr. Octopus into Oscorp Tower, which is really cool play, really fancy play. Opponent also does the same thing, plays their own Dr. Octopus. So he's having a good time. He's dancing. I respect that. I think that I think that makes a ton of sense. And then he gets the Dr. Octopus going down and pulls 4 cards from him. And Shang-Chi, it's actually great for him since he's gonna switch sides. Polaris doesn't really matter there. But then the arrow comes down, and the arrow pulls the cards that were summoned. Pulls the cards, and he pulled the storm. So it turned the Oscorp's tower into flooding. So the opponent didn't actually lose that location or lose the transfer or switching sides. However, this could have been avoided if he just played the storm first, or played it first in the order queue. The storm would have went off, and then there wouldn't be anything extra for the arrow to pull. So that's like a big example. Kind of these are unusual circumstances, right? Like Pegasus Tower changes a lot, but it kind of showcases the power of order. If he played that storm first, he wins that game completely. But because he didn't do that, he ended up faltering a little bit. But those are hard things to really memorize until it happens to you. Then it kind of becomes ingrained afterwards. But I thought this was a cool, interesting example, just showcasing the absolutely game deciding power of proper ordering. So take it as what you will. All right, so some cards only function correctly when played in proper order and can be easily mis-executed. So these cards are like Mystique, Absorbing Man, Taskmaster. These cards have to be played right before their priority targets. So if you do something like you want to copy Patriot, and you play Patriot into Misty Knight, and then you play Mystique, well, the Misty Knight's going to try to copy the Mystique's trying to copy the Misty Knight, and you're going to lose out on that premium Patriot copy effect. Same thing with Taskmaster. You want to copy high power cards. If you play a card before that, you're not going to get that full value of Taskmaster. So some cards do need to be played in proper order, and those are pretty evident. You'll usually understand those pretty quickly, but there are some other more difficult to understand cards. So here we're going to talk about priority. Priority either allows either a first turn advantage to kind of play what you want and set up your combos, or a second turn advantage to kind of counter the combos that your opponent wanted to play. So here we kind of look at the power of priority. The player played Bucky Barnes, you had a Sunspot, you had priority, you realize they want to carnage that Bucky Barnes, you toss the armor in denies that carnage play and pretty much guarantees you that lane. So that can be so strong, just understanding priority, understanding what your opponent wants to do. That's the kind of things priority can do for you. Next up, we have a second example, just kind of the downsides, right, of not really understanding the priority system. Here you see the opponent is trying to abuse Onslaught Citadel, but you have this Enchantress, right? So you say, okay, I want to shut down his cards. You play the Enchantress there. But because you had priority, you don't get to hit that blue Marvel that the opponent played right afterwards, right? So even though you do get the Patriot, you do get the Khazar, you lose out on that blue Marvel shutdown because you had priority. So those kind of things, imagine if you went second, right? You would have all priority, or you'd have all the opportunity to completely shut down his whole composition and probably, I mean, almost definitely win this game. So just understanding when it's good to have priority and when it's good to be on the back foot can be a really powerful tool in deciding games and figuring out how to completely counter your opponent. So some cards want priority, some also don't really want priority, and some depend on the board state. I would say one of the cards that wants priority is Cosmo, right? You want to Cosmo your opponent before they get to play their on reveals. If they play their on reveals, then you Cosmo doesn't really feel that good. A card that doesn't want priority is things like Enchantress, right? You want them to play their on reveal effect first, and then you can Enchantress it. Same thing with Shang-Chi. They play their big card down, then you can Shang-Chi it. But Shang-Chi's a unique card because there are some scenarios where you want to have priority with Shang-Chi. So things like if your opponent is going to do something like Armanzola, right? You want to blow up their card before they get to Armanzola. Same thing with like if they want to Doctor Strange and move their card into a different lane, you want to blow up that card before they get the Doctor Strange off. So Shang-Chi is like a very unique card because it's not always that you have to not have priority. There are definitely some scenarios where you'd rather be the one doing the action first, and then there are other scenarios where you want to be the one reacting to the plays they make. So definitely an interesting and unique system in the game. So as we've kind of talked about, right, having priority isn't necessarily good, and it's not necessarily bad either, right? It just depends on the situation. What's strong, what's good for you, right? Knowing that your opponent has priority can make you do riskier plays because they know there's no counterplay, right? Like if you're like, oh, if they have Shang-Chi, I lose here, but you realize they have priority, so they can't Shang-Chi your unit, well, then you're going to be free to make that big play, make that strong power play because you know they don't have the priority to counter your game plan. So here are some more examples of priority. We've talked about order, right? Here's an example of priority where you having priority here is extremely powerful, right? You play your Professor X, you lock down the location. They tried to play Hobgoblin, but because you had the lockdown first, the Hobgoblin stays on their side of the field and they lose out completely in this game. So definitely one of the powerful ways of capitalizing on that priority advantage. If they went first, they give you the Hobgoblin, they win that Nexus location. Next, we have an interesting one about priority. So if you see here, both players have Captain Marvel. And you can see that the Captain Marvel on the opponent's side ended up moving to the flood location, getting them the win. But as you see, they also had Captain Marvel. How come the Captain Marvel doesn't then move to the right side and get the win back? So the way it works is the person with priority will have the check on the Captain Marvel first. So as you can see, before the opponent's Captain Marvel moved to the flooded location, it was in the Shadowlands, right? So that our Captain Marvel will check the board state, see that we're already winning all 2 locations, doesn't have to move, and then stays there. Then the opponent's Captain Marvel will check, realizes that it's winning completely in Shadowlands, but not winning in flooded, and then moves over to the flooded location, gets the win, and wins the game. So because we had priority, we end up losing this game. If we didn't have priority, if we go second, first their Captain Marvel will check, go to flooding, then our Captain Marvel will check, and then go into flooding to get the win. So these are interesting scenarios that can be confusing to players if they don't understand the priority system, right? You'd look at this game and you're thinking, why didn't my Marvel move and win the game for us? So understanding this lets you be less confused and lets you understand why it's important to be behind, to be ahead, those kind of things. And here I have some examples of cards that rely on order. So these are cards that if you mis-execute on the ordering could be punishing in a lot of ways. This is not an exhaustive list, and this list will grow as more cards are being added. But this is just an idea of some of the cards that you got to make sure that your order is proper. And if you do that poorly, you could get heavily punished. And then I do have some cards for priority. Priority is a lot easier to have cards for, right? Like order is definitely something that is more based on game state a lot of the time. It's not always based on, okay, this card always order, this card always priority. So there's a lot of cards for removal, for denying plays, adding random effects, right? That priority can be a big deal for. So these are just cards to get you thinking about, oh yeah, this cares about priority because of this example. This cares about priority because of that example. So this is just to get you thinking about the game, thinking about priority, thinking about ordering and how they're important. And then the last thing I want to cover in this video is Ghost, right? So Ghost is the new Series 5 card that was just added pretty recently. Could also not be recent depending on when you're watching this. But it has the ability where you always reveal second, right? So with this card, you're always second in priority. Now that could be a very good tool if you capitalize on that, right? If you're playing a lot of countermeasure cards, Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Killmonger, this could be an amazing card for you. However, it doesn't always mean that this is going to give you an advantage. You have to be drafting a deck where going second is a big plus. So do keep that in mind. I do think this is going to be a very strong card. I think this is very impactful for the type of players that like to counter your opponent's strategies. So it's just a card that kind of encapsulates all of what we've talked about today: the power of priority, the power of proper ordering, making sure things go the way you want them to go. So definitely that is my thoughts on ordering. That's my thoughts on priority. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And I'll see you in the next one.